And now we invite you to listen to this telling of the Passion story. Who knows why Jesus chose to visit the chief priests that day? Some say it was his lust for money. Others suggest that he might have been angered by Jesus' pacifism. And there are those few who believe he was trying to accelerate God's timetable, forcing the showdown that would bring the Almighty One to Jesus' aid and legitimate their movement. But truthfully, we don't really know his reasons. All we have is the story. "What will you give me if I betray him?" Judas asked. And the going rate was a paltry 30 pieces of silver. From that moment on, Judas was looking for his chance to betray their leader.
Meanwhile, in the city of Jerusalem, the preparations for the Feast of Unleavened Bread continued as planned. "Where shall we eat the Passover meal?" Jesus said. "There's a certain man in the city who will make a place for us. Just give him this message. The teacher says, 'My time is near, and I wish to celebrate the Passover at your house.'" It sounded like a bit of cryptic intrigue, more spy novel than Holy Writ. But we did as they were told, and soon the meal was ready.
When evening came, Jesus took his place among us. Then he dropped the bombshell. "You know, one of you is going to sell me out." Protests began to fill the air like a chorus. "Not me, Lord, not me. Surely not I." So the unthinkable had to be restated. Things will proceed as they are written, which means betrayal and suffering and death. Woe to the one who is the instrument of such destruction. But Judas, who was dipping a vegetable into the bowl of salty water, never missed a beat. "Teacher," he said, feigning his innocence, "surely you don't mean me." We all heard it. He called him teacher, not Lord. It was a small mistake, his choosing the language of the unbelievers. But Jesus played the drama to the end. "You're the one who knows the truth," he said. And so the meal continued.
While we were eating, Jesus took a loaf of bread, around and said, "Take, eat. This is my body." Then he took a cup, and after giving thanks, he gave it to us, saying, "Drink from it, all of you, for this is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins. I tell you, I will never again drink of the fruit of the vine until that day when I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom." There was no recounting of the exodus from Egypt when the matzah was broken, no remembering the protection of the lamb's blood on the doorpost, only these allusions to impending death, and a most unusual interpretation of the Seder meal, most unusual indeed. And when we had sung our hymn, we adjourned to the Mount of Olives.
Eat this bread, drink this cup, come to him and never be hungry. Eat this bread, drink this cup, trust in him and you will not thirst. Jesus Christ, bread of life, those who come to you
Disillusionment is often part of the human experience. It's hard to have hope in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds. We had come to believe that Jesus was the long-awaited Messiah, and we lived in great anticipation of the return of the golden age of Israel's past. What we didn't know was the degree to which this faith would be tested on this day and the next. Jesus said, "You will all become deserters because of me this night. For it is written, I will strike the shepherd and the sheep of the flock will be scattered. But after I am raised up, I will go ahead of you to Galilee." And Peter responded, "Though all become deserters because of you, I will never desert you." This was vintage Peter. Truly, I tell you, this very night before the cock crows, you will deny me 3 times. But Peter held firm, at least for the moment. "Even though I must die with you, I won't deny you." And we all joined in the chorus. It's so easy to make abstract promises and so difficult to deliver.
Jesus led us to a place called Gethsemane, and he asked us to wait while he went aside to pray. He took Peter and James and John aside and spoke in agitated tones of the grief that lay heavy on his heart. "Remain here," he said, "and please stay awake with me." Then, throwing himself on the ground, he uttered these words to the God he called Abba. "If it is possible, let this cup pass from me, and yet not my will, but yours." Meanwhile, Peter and the others had fallen asleep. Returning to the group, the scene was repeated. "Stay awake," he said, "and pray that you may not come into the time of trial. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak." He repeated his prayer. "If this cannot pass unless I drink it, your will be done." But for the second time, we fell asleep. Truth is, we don't know how many times he prayed that night. But when we woke, we heard him say, "See, the hour is at hand, and the Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Get up and let us be going. See, my betrayer is coming."
That's when Judas arrived, and with him the chief priest and elders of the people, armed with swords and clubs. He came up to Jesus. "Greetings, Rabbi," and offered him a kiss. Jesus replied, "Friend, do what you are here to do." And with that, they arrested him.
Shocked by this turn of events, one of us drew a sword and struck the slave of the high priest, cutting off his ear. But Jesus intervened. "Put your sword away. Those who take the sword will perish by the sword. Do you think I cannot appeal to my Father? And he will at once send me more than 12 legions of angels. But how then would the scriptures be fulfilled, which say it must happen in this way? And to you who have come with swords and clubs to arrest me like a bandit, day after day I sit in the temple teaching, and you did not arrest me. But all this has taken place so that the scriptures of the prophets may be fulfilled." And in that moment, we deserted him and fled.
Following the arrest, they took him to Caiaphas, the high priest, where the scribes and the elders had gathered. Peter followed as far as the courtyard, then seated himself among the guards to see how it all would end The chief priest and the whole council were looking for false testimony against Jesus so that they could put him to death. And when the two came forward, saying, "He told us, I am able to destroy the temple of God and build it in 3 days," they had what they needed. The high priest turned to Jesus, expecting him to justify his remarks. But Jesus was silent. Caiaphas pressed him further. "I put you under oath before the living God. Are you the Messiah, the Son of God?" "You have said so," he replied. "But I tell you, from now on, you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven." Then the high priest tore his clothes and said, "He has blasphemed. Why do we still need witnesses? You have heard his blasphemy. What is your verdict?" The room was in a frenzy. "He deserves death," they agreed. Then they spat in his face and struck him, and some even slapped him, saying, "Prophesy to us, you Messiah. Who is it that struck you?"
Now Peter was sitting outside in the courtyard when a servant girl came to him. "You were with Jesus, the Galilean." But he denied it, saying, "I don't know what you're talking about." Then out on the porch, another servant girl saw him and said to the bystanders, "This man was with Jesus of Nazareth." So Peter swore an oath, "I don't know the man." Then a bystander approached him and said, "Certainly you are also one of them, for your accent betrays you." And Peter began to curse, "I don't know the man." It was only the cock's crow that reminded him of Jesus' words about denial. And he left the courtyard, weeping bitterly.
When morning came, the priest and the elders bound Jesus and handed him over to Governor Pilate. By this time, Judas had begun to regret his decision and tried to return the 30 pieces of silver, knowing his actions would lead to the murder of an innocent man. Nevertheless, it was too late. His remorse was his problem. So Judas, filled with pain, threw the silver to the temple floor, fled to the countryside, and hanged himself. Someone suggested that the money might be gathered from the floor and returned to the treasury. But blood money was unclean. So they agreed to use it to buy a field to use as a burial place for foreigners. Unclean money for unclean purposes. We were reminded of the words of the prophet Jeremiah. "And they took the 30 pieces of silver, the price of the one on whom a price had been set, and they gave them for the potter's field, as the Lord had commanded." When Jesus stood before the governor, Pilate asked, "Are you the king of the Jews?" "You say so," he replied. "Do you not hear how many accusations they are making against you?" But Jesus gave no answer, not to a single charge. And the governor was greatly amazed.
Now at the time of the festival, it was the custom of the governor to release a prisoner for the crowd. This year they were holding a most notorious man by the name of Jesus Barabbas. After the people had gathered, Pilate, realizing full well that Jesus of Nazareth had been handed over out of jealousy, asked them, "Which one shall I release? Jesus Barabbas or Jesus who is called the Messiah?" But before they could answer, a message came to Pilate from his wife. "Have nothing to do with that innocent man," she said. I've had a most unsettling dream about him." The chief priest and the elders had stirred the crowd to a fever pitch, and they were screaming for Barabbas. Then, when Pilate said to them, "What should I do with Jesus, who is called the Messiah?" And all of them replied, "Let him be crucified." Pilate saw he could do nothing. The crowd was close to riot. So he took some water and washed his hands in front of us all, saying, "I am innocent of this man's blood. See to it yourselves." The people shouted back, "His blood be on us and on our children." Barabbas was released, and Jesus was flogged and handed over to be crucified.
The soldiers took Jesus to the governor's headquarters, where they stripped him and put on a scarlet robe. And after twisting some thorns into a crown, they put it on his head. They placed a reed in his right hand, and falling to their knees, they mocked him, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews." Then they spat on him and took the reed and struck him on the head. Finally, they took away the robe, returned his clothes, and led him away. When they left the palace, they came upon a man from Cyrene by the name of Simon. And the soldiers commandeered him to carry Jesus' cross to Golgotha, the place of the skull. But the humiliation did not stop there. Upon arrival, they offered Jesus a mixture of sour wine and gall to drink, which upon tasting, he refused. And when they had crucified him, they cast lots for his clothes. A sign was hung over his head, which read, "This is Jesus, the King of the Jews." Then they settled down to watch him die.
2 bandits were crucified with him, one on his right and one on his left. Those who passed by derided him, shaking their heads and saying, "You who would destroy the temple and build it in 3 days, save yourself. If you are the Son of God, come down from the cross." In the same way, the chief priests and the elders were mocking him, saying, "If he's the King of Israel, let him come down from the cross now, and we will believe him." One of the bandits who hung alongside joined in. "Some Messiah you are. Save yourself. Save us." But the other man silenced him, saying, "Have you no fear of God? We deserve this, but he's done nothing." And turning to Jesus, he implored him, "Remember me when you come into your kingdom." "Don't worry," Jesus said. "Don't worry."
Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. Jesus.
From noon on, darkness came over the whole land. At about 3, Jesus cried with a loud voice, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. My God, why have you forsaken me? But the bystanders thought he was calling for Elijah. One ran and got a sponge and filled it with the sour wine and placed it on a stick so he could drink. It was a mocking act designed to prolong Jesus' agony for a few more minutes. Others spoke the joke aloud, saying, Wait, let us see whether Elijah will come to save him. It was then that Jesus cried with a loud voice and drew his final breath.
At that moment, the curtain of the temple was torn from top to bottom. The earth shook and the rocks were split. The tombs also were opened, and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised. They came out of the tombs and entered the holy city and appeared to many. And when the centurion and those who were keeping watch with him saw this, they were terrified, and they said, Truly this man was God's son.
Many women, including Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James and Joseph, and the mother of the sons of Zebedee, were also there, looking on from a distance. They had followed Jesus from Galilee, carrying him along the way. And when the evening came, a rich man from Arimathea, who was one of Jesus' followers, went to Pilate and asked for the body. Then he took the body, wrapped it in a clean linen cloth, and laid it in his own tomb, which he had hewn in the rock. He rolled a great stone in front of the entrance and left the women there to grieve.
The next day, the chief priests and the Pharisees gathered before Pilate and said, Sir, we remember what the impostor said while he was still alive. After 3 days, I will rise again. Maybe you should command that the tomb be closed until after the 3rd day. Otherwise, his disciples might go and steal him away and tell the people he has been raised from the dead. This last deception would be worse than the first. And Pilate, thinking this wise, said to them, You have a guard of soldiers. Go. Make it as secure as you can. And so they went with the guard and made the tomb secure by sealing the stone.
And here endeth the telling of the story.